And welcome back to Skylight Live. My name is Tyree Marshall, and I'm an artistic associate at Skylight Theater Company and associate producer of Apartment Living, our second show of our 2021-2022 collaborative season with Playwrights Arena. As we've done for previous seasons at Skylight, Beyond Conversations is our series of panels which take a deep dive in topics relating to or connected to our shows at Skylight. Apartment Living follows 4 characters' journeys in navigating the pandemic while simultaneously living in the same apartment complex. Amongst the diverse characters in the story are Dixon and Easter, a son and mother of Filipinx descent who navigate the tumultuous times together in their 1-bedroom apartment. Our panel this evening, Filipinx Representation in Theater, will take a deep dive discussion in representation, the panelists' own personal journeys, systemic inequality, and so much more. Our evening will be moderated by the lovely Lucy MSP Burns. Lucy MSP Burns is an associate professor in the Asian American Studies Department at UCLA, whose writings include Puro Arte, Filipinos on the Stages of Global Empire, and the co-edited anthology, California Dreaming, Place and Movement in Asian American Imaginary. As a dramaturg, Burns has collaborated with BIPOC, multidisciplinary theater, and dance makers. Burns is also a member of a research group consisting of artists, academia, and art professionals who have been conducting research and conversations about the impact of COVID-19 closures in BIPOC theater artists and organizations. So I am pleased to introduce to you Lucy MSP Burns to start off our night.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lucy Burns, and I'm honored to be facilitating this conversation. And first, I want to begin with a thank you to Playwrights Arena, Skylights Theater, Armando, Tyree, Seth, for giving us this space to have this wonderful conversation. And wherever it goes, I'm dialing in from the land of Gabrielino and Tonga peoples, and where I work and live. And I'm also specifically dialing from a neighborhood very close to the theater, in a neighborhood in Califas that's founded on, actually this neighborhood is one of the first expropriated indigenous lands in California. So I just wanted to share that with you all. I'll start with introductions of our wonderful Shirley. Probably no introductions needed, but nevertheless, I will do it. Very honored to be with these folks tonight. So I'll start introductions with playwright Boni Alvarez, who is a Los Angeles-based actor playwright. His plays include America Adjacent, Bloodletting, Fix Nikki, Dallas Nonstop, Dusty de los Santos, Driven, Refuge for a Purple Heart, and Ruby Tragedy Rodent. So Boni's plays, and I've seen a number of those, have the opportunity to see a few of those. So I'm very honored and excited to have Boni be part of this conversation. Boni's plays have been produced at the Center Theater Group, Kirk Douglas Theater, the Echo Theater Company, Courage Theater Company, Skylight Theater Company, the Theater Rhinoceros, and Playwrights Arena. He's an alum of the CTG Writers Workshop, the Echo Writers Lab, Humanitas Play LA, Moving Arts Mad Lab, the CBS Writers Mentoring Program, and the Geffen Playhouse Writers Room. He is also currently in Skylight's Theater Skylab and a resident playwright of New Dramatists. So applause, applause, applause for Boni. And now next is we have John Lawrence Rivera, director, artistic director, Playwrights Arena, is the recipient of the first Career Achievement Award from Stage Row, or Raw. His directing credits include the following world premieres for Playwrights Arena: A Hit Dog Will Holler by Inda Craig Galvan, co-produced with Skylight Theater Company. March, A Parking Lot Play, co-produced with the Los Angeles LGBT Center. Southernmost by Mary Lyon Kamitaki. Baby Eyes by Donald Jolly. Bloodletting by Boni Alvarez, also at the Kirk Douglas Theater. And the landmark Los Angeles premiere of Dog Eaters by Jessica Hagedorn at SIPA and Kirk Douglas Theater, making him the first Filipino-American director to direct at CTG. So Rivera is the recipient of a the New York Fringe Festival Award for directing Hillary Agonistes, an LA Weekly Award for directing Sea Change, and 5 Ovation Award nominations. So welcome, Direct John Rivera. And our next, I'll introduce next is Alison de la Cruz, the co-artistic director of Outside in Theater. Alison de la Cruz is an executive arts leader, facilitator, cultural organizer, producer, multidisciplinary theater artist, educator, contemporary ritualist, and a yelder. Am I saying that right, Alison? De la Cruz is a member of the board of directors for the network of ensemble theaters, and honored to be a founding and co-artistic director of the newly emerging Outside in Theater. Also in the pandemic, De La has created Tractable. I like to say tractable. Also in the a space for women of color out about Star Trek Discovery. So please, a round of applause for De La and for everyone on this panel this evening. Again, thank you to Skylight and Playwrights Arena for Skylight Theater and Playwrights Arena for facilitating this or giving us a space to have this conversation. And when I was actually reading the title, because I think the series is called Beyond Conversations, Filipinx Representation in Theater or something like that. And I kept reading it as Beyond Filipinx Representation in Theater. I'm like, that is like a really interesting conversation. I cannot wait to hear, I think that's more interesting. So I was sort of, just seeing these words next to each other, but, but it also means we will go where we go with this conversation. So, and I'm glad to hear that we do have opportunity to hear, or at least through questions from those who are joining us on YouTube. Give you a shout out. We cannot see you physically, or digitally, but we know that you're there. So, all right. So I think I'll just start, this is going to be a conversation among kaibigans who haven't seen each other in a long time. So I'm just going to say, how are you all doing? What have you been doing? How do you keep your skin so beautifully maintained, like after, 2.5 years of not seeing the sun? So, but all that to say, yeah, I just want to hear just a little beginning with that, how you're doing. I guess I'll start with Dela. Go ahead. And then we'll do follow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Hi. Hi to folks on YouTube. Put questions in the chat. We want to answer those questions. And thank you so much to Lucy for that open, and congratulations to Boni and John on this play, Apartment Living. Super excited that it's up, and I can't wait to see it, and just hearing amazing things. So super excited. I will say I've discovered in the pandemic, yeah, I just had to welcome the slowing down. I had to welcome, I had opportunities to pause, and I've been reflecting a lot. I've been writing a lot. I've been thinking a lot. And I will say one of the things I've been doing in the pandemic to try to support myself is been singing a lot of karaoke. I've been singing a lot and just trying to wail it out. And yeah, I'm working on all my notes right now. So we'll see, that might become a fun performative avenue in a little bit. But yeah, reading a lot of plays, and then just thinking a lot about what does it mean right now for us to be the makers that we are. So, and yeah, just happy to see people when I can. And I guess the last thing I would say is I'm discovering I'm having, as a social person, it's actually been really difficult to come back into large space. So that's a different thing for me, for a lot of folks who know. So it's been interesting, but I'm good.
Thank you. Boni, how are you?
I am doing well, busy as ever, teaching. Very, I don't know if excited is the right word, but was very happy to be in a theater once again, amongst people creating theater. It's an odd time to be in theater, kind of breaking the seal of isolation, and experiencing that communal thing that is theater every week. So I'm happy to be back in the theater, but I think it also is forcing me to kind of inventory the last 2 years and how I was feeling not being in practice, if you will, at least in practice of rehearsal and performance. So I'm kind of just taking that all in, and yeah, very eager to see how theater forges forward.
Thank you, Boni. All right, John.
Hello, everybody. It's so interesting. I mean, I am not a person who can stay still for 5 minutes. And so once our theaters were shuttered around mid-March of 2020, I was depressed for about 2 weeks, just because, like Alison said, we're such social people that we want to be in a room with other people creating art, and then once the art is created, being engaging with our communities, with our audiences, having that kind of life that we've been leading for decades. And when that got away, all of a sudden you really have a moment of pause and really moment to really reflect on what you've done and what to be done. And one of the things that I learned through the pandemic is that I could cook meals for actors and artists in the community. So I did that for about 1.5 years of really just making dishes to give away to different artists. Alison came to the house one time. Boni has come to the house several times, and just shared meals. And it was just a time when we had to be outdoors and we can't be indoors. So I would set up like, where I park my car, I would take my car away and put a table there and just gather people around outside and eat and at least have that moment together. And I think the part of communications and the part of engaging each other never got lost, either through Zoom or this mini reunions, mini moments of just breaking bread together and talking. I think that has become like, the escape from this terrible pandemic that really kept us at home and isolated. And those little moments of being just out there, talking to people, having a meal, chatting and drinking, I think that was really what got me through it. And of course, still creating some kind of art throughout until we came out last November with A Hit Dog Will Holler, which was our first collaborative show in our season with Skylight Theater Company. So, and now we're doing Boni's play. So it's really been sort of like a scary moment in the very beginning, but I think overall, all of us tried to figure out how to push through it. And I think we've emerged on the other side of that with a lot of prospects. And I know Alison is doing a lot of amazing things, ahead of her. And I know Boni's commissioned other plays that he's writing. So I feel like, there's a lot of things to look forward to as we emerge from, hopefully fully emerge from this pandemic.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so thanks for taking us there. I'm actually like to pick up from that and maybe ask Alison and Boni to talk about something that Alison kind of said earlier about what it means to be the workers that we are. And I know that, John, you said you had to really reflect on like whatever that moment of pause, whatever that may look like. It didn't necessarily mean that we sat still, right? Even the thinking about what has it meant to be a theater artist and what does it mean to be a theater artist at a time of pandemic. And then that's lovely. I was following I forgot the Instagram account, but I was following you in your kitchen.
Flip kitchen. The flip kitchen.
Yes, flip kitchen. And I
have to always be extra, so it's flip kitchen.
Of course. No, it was lovely to see that. And and I thought, like, this is so amazing. Like, we're still theater people, but what did it mean to, like, what did we have to call upon to keep, to keep being the theater people that we are? So I'd love to hear from Alison and Boni, what those, moments, whatever they are, like the moment that it happened, those 3 months that it was really intense, or, in the last 2.5 years, kind of the directions where you turned. Boni, I think Della's pointing to you first.
I think I got quite a few significant opportunities during pandemic, which I was actually surprised. Several commissions, which I was really thankful for. They came at just the right time, specifically, during the summer when I wasn't teaching. I wrote a lot during the pandemic. I can't say that it was always inspired, but I did it. And I think I relied a lot on craft versus inspiration. But there was a certain sense of depression. There's a lot of moments where you're writing and you stop writing and you're just like, are we ever going to get into a theater? And like, why am I writing these plays? And we all know theater moves at like glacial paces, right? You're lucky if your play finds a production 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8, 9 years after it's been written. So at that point, I was like, well, we don't know how long this pandemic's going to last. Let's say it lasts 5 years, and then it takes 5 years for theaters to like get back up. and then there's this backlog of other plays that people are committed to, so there was this kind of defeatist attitude that the pandemic kind of fostered for me. And then there were so many, social and cultural and racial reckonings that the pandemic just, intensified even more. And not to be like, to poo-poo, theater, and I'm probably mostly talking about, larger institutions, predominantly white institutions, and their programming. And I always feel like, as someone Filipino, it's like you're fighting just to get noticed, and you're trying to get scraps. And I was just like, is there room for Filipinos to come out of the pandemic in a stronger positionality than we were beforehand? And sadly, I feel like there isn't, because it seems like the larger institutions in LA don't know the demographics of LA and seem to think that the population of Asian Americans in LA is much smaller than it actually is. LA has, like, I think, one of the biggest population of Filipinos outside of the Philippines. Nobody seems to know that. Nobody seems to know that the Filipinos are in the top 3 of Asian populations in the country. It was so ironic. I was catching up on Grey's Anatomy during pandemic because I ran out of things to binge. And I was like, oh, look, season 17, and there's a Filipino nurse. My God, it only took 17 seasons to get representation, as though and I was like, and don't tell me nobody on that staff ever in 17 seasons has not known a Filipino medical worker. Like, I boggled my mind. So when they have this character named Girly, who was Filipino and had COVID on Grey's Anatomy, I was like, oh, wow, look, it took a pandemic. But really, should we celebrate the one character? And I guess the answer is yes. But then it's yes and, right? Along improv, like yes and then what? So I feel like, it's also, we get labeled as a monolith. So like, if there's a Chinese centered production, then, the theaters feel like they've done their job, and, maybe we'll fit in a Filipino. I don't know when they're going to fit. No one's fitting in Filipino narratives at the larger institutions in this city. That's a fact. So it's not me exaggerating. But Thursday night, student group from Loyola Marymount comes, and this young Filipina comes up to me after the show, and she is in tears, and she says, I just want to thank you. I've never seen Filipino characters on the stage. Which to me is like, what? I see them all the time. Well, yeah, because I'm like, in-house in my writing. So that is what I have to like hold on to. And again, last night, there was a student group from LACC. And once again, there was a young Filipino man who is an aspiring actor. And he kind of just gushed about basically seeing himself, because there is a young Filipino male character in the play. So those are the things that I hold on to, but not to like to come across as someone colonized by the system, but we want, I want a piece of that pie, you know what I mean? So that those kids can see themselves represented on stage more often and in a larger way. So I try to stay hopeful, because, this theater thing that we all pursue is kind of a romantic, exercise, if you will. But yeah, so I guess I'm angry a little bit, and but I move forward and I keep writing, because there's work to be done. Sorry, that was a big long monologue that I was not planning on spouting.
That was awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I mean, it's a lot, and it's, all those things exist in all of us, and like in one person, in one day, in 1 minute, we're having all those feelings. So thank you for verbalizing it so beautifully, poetically, and with so much heart always with your work, Boni. So I just want to, before I call up Dela, I just want to thank you for that. I think it's so incredibly important. Yeah. And then I want to come back to apartment living a little bit more later. So, but please, Dela, tell us what you've been, like, where you turned.
I mean, I think certainly the inward, I think one of the things I really appreciated is I got a chance to direct some more stage readings and people trying to finish copies of play, like being able to be in rehearsals, at least in Zooms, were helpful. Noah Gardner's new play, I got a chance to work on. Also, I realized, like, a friend of mine asked if I would help this Pakistani American woman dramaturg her stand-up show. So part of what's been happening is just like, I was trying to give in any way I could. Like, I just have this energy. How do I don't want to leave my house, but I can do a dramaturgy call, 2 hours every, 2 weeks. And we've worked out whatever that system is. So you can get through so you have a thought partner. So I think part of the way I found energy was to realize the power of being a thought partner to an artist, or to be a collaborator to artists who were trying to battle being isolated, and like, what does that mean when I need feedback on work? So that definitely happened. I certainly went through a major career change during the pandemic. So I just feel like I have to acknowledge, like, I got a position at another organization, got laid off, my father passed away. Like, the beginning of the pandemic has just been filled with so much loss. And then even like that, like, I have an aunt and uncle who died an hour apart in ICU in the Philippines because COVID, right? And so just having these life moments of like, what is it? How do we support people as they grieve? What is this process of us? How do we find joy? And for folks who, like, hearing you recount, Boni, I was just like, and for those of us who've been social justice aware, for those of us who are engaged in this work, for those of us who are building dialogue, who are trying to create space for unrepresented folks, who are trying to shine a light on the diversity and the beauty that already has existed in this country, continues to exist, and the futures that we're all imagining for ourselves and each other. I think I just started to try to find ways to stay connected to that. Certainly at Outside In, one of the things we're still forming, we're new. And so one of the questions we keep asking is, how are we different? Why are we starting right now? What does Los Angeles need us? You know what I mean? Like, and we're finding some really interesting, difficult conversations with our neighbors in Highland Park, and the reality being told straight up by an activist, like, y'all should leave. In the last 3 years, 17,000 Latinos have had to leave Highland Park because of economic gentrification and people not just being priced out of places they're from. And so, thinking about, so because I'm a place-based person, because so much of my work is, in my work in Asian American theater, it's like, I want to invite everybody to take a breath, and we're going to connect, and we're going to be in this space together. So when we weren't in space together, I think at my core, I really felt panic about, because I think up until that point, I was pretty clear, and honestly, with deep love and gratitude, each of you has been critical in my journey of understanding myself as a storyteller. And like, part of my sacred purpose is to bring people together, right? Part of my purpose is to engage voices that have never been heard. And I thought that when we were in digital, that meant my purpose stopped. And what I've discovered is, no, we have to remember, we have to remind each other of that sacred alchemy of what happens when we're in a room together, when we breathe and when we connect, and when we watch plays or we watch performances, and we all suddenly breathe at the same moment or cry at the same moment. Like, I was just like, how do we get that in digital? And so part of what I've been figuring out is like, why am I afraid of digital? It became a new way as a playwright, as a producer, as a director, to challenge myself about, what am I afraid of? I think it's one thing to say I'm a theater maker. I think it was another thing to accept this digital moniker. And what I've appreciated about this whole process is I'm not about to emerge as a filmmaker or a complete digital creator only, but I do find importance in this geometry of what does the digital do that allows us to come back in space with each other. And so I started to figure out, how do I cultivate joy? What do I like? What's, who can I help give joy to, given all the shit that's, all the things that are happening in this world? And I realized I'm a Star Trek nerd. I don't know. And there's a brand new show in the new Star Trek verse called Star Trek Discovery. I'm not trying to pump a commercial product, but I'm appreciative to finally see a sci-fi property that reflects the future it said it always was. And so to start to find other nerds, and I will say the thing about our show, like it's a podcast, it's a web show, whatever, but we run as an ensemble. My stage managers, we're all theater people. And so part of it also became, I knew a bunch of folks who, all the tech gigs stopped. And so part of me was like, how do I help support people? Like my co-producer is also Pinay, Luzviminda Jariwala. We actually grew up here in Carson together. She lives in Boston. And together we're really trying to figure out, how do we, in the little ways we can, we give honorariums to our speakers, we're trying to figure out how to support people. So I think the thing I'm inspired to remind us all, I heard it in what John said, I'm hearing it in what Boni you're saying, is like, the key right now is to remember these moments about how we're connected, and that this is where we can give ourselves permission to take a little bit more risk, receive a little bit more awareness, connection, attention. So Trek Table, or Trektable, I love that. Trek Table is this like women of color space, because what I also found out is in the Star Trek fandom, there wasn't safe space for me to be a queer, bigger bodied woman of color, gender non-conforming person. You know what I mean? Like, people didn't want to talk about us. People were upset that Star Trek was suddenly not centered on straight white men. And there's some really, so just, it reminded me parallels of theater, and it helped me understand the theatricalness in which, Trek Table looks the way it does, sounds the way it does, because I'm a theater maker, because this is the way I can make theater right now. And it is a ritual, but it is also a gathering, and it's an exchange. So I would say that's part of what I've been doing. And then also trying to figure out, and, working with my co-artistic director, Jessica Hanna at Outside In. Like trying to ask this question of like, what, if we slow ourselves down, if we take away the capitalist intensity of time, I'm curious about what does it mean to make slower theater? And I don't think it makes it worse, but like, how could we invest in ourselves so we're not haggard on a 20, because tech is a 10 out of 12, and like all the things that we have that like, so I'm just curious in making with each other, what permissions can we give ourselves? What lessons can we learn? What opportunities do we have right now to reshape how we do what we do? Because we've been given this gift. And not that the pandemic has been a gift, because there's been so much loss. But how can we hold all of the containers of all these different pieces is kind of what I've been trying to figure out too. And that was my monologue. Thank you.
Applause. Thank you so much. And we'll pick up on that, because that's actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask the panel is, and you all sort of say it so much more beautifully and poetically, but really thinking about, what, again, to go back to that, like, what is a theater artist at a time of pandemic? And I heard a lot of different things, but really one of the things that I want to pick up here is that the kind of the labor that do in bringing us all together in a space in a way that is, it's different from other ways, right? So there's this kind of ritualistic piece to it. But I can't remember who it was, but I heard somebody say, that as theater artists, this is, I think, early on in the pandemic, kind of reminding each other that like our labor is, as theater folks, is to kind of not teach, but sort of guide folks on how to be together in a space and experience something together, a live thing, together. So I thought that was really incredible and incredibly weighty, right? And that you all, take up that challenge. So I would want to ask maybe to have John start this thread of the conversation about what it was like. I know that Apartment Living wasn't the first production that, going back into the theater, but just talk a little bit about, like the adjustments and the challenges, and then the joys of like, oh, wow, we're in this different thing and we have to do things differently. And then what creative thing kind of came out of that. Would love to hear, just that bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, Playwrights Arena has always been committed to uplifting diverse narratives and artists. So for us, the realization of diversity is not anything new to us. We've been doing it for 30 years. And I think that's why we have been in engagement and in collaboration with different playwrights, with Alison, with Boni, with Inda, with Donald, with with a lot of different playwrights and different artists. And I think the pandemic, even at this latest incarnation of our shows, because we already did one in November, and it was even tougher in November because we literally have to have certain zones for designers that they can't cross over. They cannot go into the dressing room. I cannot go into the dressing room. There is a marker where you stop and then the actors can be inside. And we have to always wear masks. The actors don't have to when they're in rehearsals, but everybody else has to wear masks. And we were still doing that even when we opened Apartment Living. And I will let Boni talk a little bit more about how it got started. But once we got into the theater, there were a lot of protocol that is new, that was never part of our lives before 2020. So everybody we had to be tested 3 times a week, and that only eased up about 3 weeks ago to only 2 times a week. So that all of that. So before you go into rehearsal, you've got to test at home and make sure it's negative, and then you can go into the rehearsal. And now that it's every 2 weeks, we have somebody, just getting our temperature to make sure that, even though we've tested, that we don't have any fever or anything like that. So it's very different in the way, not only in the way that we interact as directors with actors, because I'm very tactile and I can like, oh, no, move over here. And now there's always distance, and I always have to like, and whatever I touch, if they're going to touch it next, and it has to be like, just sprayed a little bit so that it's like sanitized again. There are new ways of engaging actors. There's a little bit of provocative scenes in Apartment Living that usually I would have just staged it myself with no problem. But now we have to get an intimacy director to be involved so that there is somebody who has gone through the training of how to go through and the words and the actual, how to desexualize those moments and just become really about, front, chest, and back, and all of that, and where you put your hand and all of these things. So it's just a different, way of dealing theater as we move forward. And I think it will ease up, but there are certain things that probably will not go away. I don't think an intimacy director will go away, just like fight choreographers are not going to go away. So if there is something that you really need some deep, help on those things, then you would have to get, somebody who's an expert at that. But I think the one thing that I for Boni and I know when Alison's writing a play, how important it is to be as authentic as possible with the casting. And I think one of the things that Alison has hinted about digital programming is that you can literally have authentic casting, because if you can't find them in LA, you can literally get somebody in the Philippines to be on that reading so that you have the voice, because we're not limited into like, oh, who's in LA and how, too bad she lives in New York, or I knew somebody in the Philippines will be perfect. But now you go, hey, can you get on Zoom? It's going to be this, and all of a sudden you get to hear those voices. And I think Boni and I have had several readings of other work that he's working on where we could literally engage people from, outside of LA to really get the right authentic voices that we need for those roles. But I think that's, just part of it. And I'd love to hear Boni and Alison, share whatever their experiences are.
I do think along the lines of like, it's not even an intimacy, because I think it's sensitivity. It's something that I've noticed, at least with my students, that there's this increasing resistance to actually feeling. And it's a hard thing to reconcile when you're trying to train young artists for the field. And they're fearful. I get that all the time. They want stories of joy and they're resistant to trauma. And I'm like, well, they're on the same spectrum, right? Like you can't have one without the other. So you know what I mean? Like it has to come from somewhere or be a result of something else. So in that sense, I'm just like, oh, wow. I think the having sensitivity and / intimacy type folks as part of the mix changes the atmosphere a little bit of theater that I'm used to. More and more, I feel like I'm getting older and just being like, well, in my day, we didn't do it, but you know what I mean? Like, I do feel a transitioning of expectations from younger folks, especially with the students. So I'm very curious to see what theater looks like in the next decade, because I think it will result into something, not something entirely different, but something that is practiced differently, perhaps.
Thank you, Dela. Before I let you take off your mute, I just want to interject here. Like, I love the, hearing from you, John, about like really, literally, this is what it takes to do this labor, right? And I always appreciate that because what we see on stage is spectacular, and apartment living is that. So I am so grateful, and thank you for sharing that generosity of sharing that process, because it is not known to those of us who just sit in the theater and enjoy it. And Boni, I love that this trepidation around certain kinds of feelings, right? And what it might produce. So I am too. I'm also I also teach, I suppose I put that in quotations. And yeah, and I think I recognize that a similar thing. And it's also very sort of just task oriented. What do I need to do to get this done? Kind of. So that's been fascinating to me. And then the other thing, just I wanted to interject, and as a theater, as an audience member, and how out of practice I was really when I started going again. I, a little bit in the fall, for sure, and then earlier, I think sometime in like mid-February, and I think that might have impacted the way I responded to certain things that I saw. I'd like to think that it's the piece itself, but it was difficult. So all I can say is that like I was definitely out of practice. So to go to apartment living, I guess it was a week ago on a Monday. It was just, I felt good. My body felt good to sit there. I was with it. I didn't leave what I was experiencing at all. I didn't count the lights above me, which I usually do. Sorry. So all to say that, that's just, I just want to thank you for that experience, because I feel like, okay, I am still this, I can still be with this. So Dela, going to you now. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge, like, I haven't produced an in-person event yet, and so I'm super humbled to hear all this stuff. I will acknowledge personally, I just went back inside of a theater 2 weeks ago, because those 2 shows I saw during pandemic were outside. One of them I really regret seeing because, yeah, but it was one of those moments too of like, I really regret seeing this piece of theater. I don't want to see all these white phalluses on stage, but this is the show I agreed to come to. Okay, you know, so I guess I want to say like, the thing the thing I'm interested in talking with folks about, the thing I appreciate about this conversation is it helps me to also think about kind of what you just said, Lucy, is like, what can we do as theater makers, theater creators? How do we continue to support audiences coming back into our houses? And like, as you said, that it made me be like, oh, I want to see if we could do a, hey, come back inside the theater day, just to be inside, not to see a show, but just like, what would it mean to give people permission to slowly come back into our spaces? Or, and I say that as somebody who doesn't have a current physical space to manage. So I think part of what I want to lean into is the ways it, like, because we're Filipinx, and like, what are the different ways culturally that we need to give ourselves permission for whatever, to see, to witness, to share, to be in space with each other, to laugh with people. And I think about that not only for Filipinx folks, but also just theater community in general. And I think you alluded to this at the beginning, Lucy, is like, as theater makers, we come from practices, we come from traditions, we come from rituals that help teach us how to engage in space. We come from places that teach. I mean, one thing that I'm really excited that Outside In was able to do, even though we don't have a physical space, is we were able to partner with City Company and host an LA intensive for Suzuki and Viewpoints. And to have a room full of, I will say, I haven't been back in a theater, but I trained in Suzuki Viewpoints for a week with a mask on and stomped and all the things. And it was amazing to be back in my body. And I could feel from all the people I was training with, like, just this moment. So I want to acknowledge there are a lot of folks out there who want to be in rehearsal rooms again, who want to be at table readings, who want to be at computers, who want to be at sound mixing boards. And there are also lots of people who want to see stories, but I'm just curious, now pandemic another reason why people will not come to theater? And so how do I just love and embrace that and just say, no, anak, like, just come in, like, just come here. Like, this is where. And so just to hear that story you told, Boni, about young people, like, yeah, the power of our seeing ourselves, hearing ourselves. John, what you said, like, to hear the right Filipino accent. You know, there's an actor in LA who I love because I know he sounds like my dad, and I don't get that accent all the time. So I just want to acknowledge we have a specificity to who we are. And that's my other hope right now, is like that Boni's writing a lot, I'm writing some stuff too, for sure. Fran and I are about to revisit some stuff we did with you, John. So like, I just want to say, like, to anybody who's watching, to anybody who's connected to creative folks, what question can you ask them to encourage them to feel like they could go back to that practice? And not to add pressure to it, but like, there's a lot of different things we need to see right now. There are stories we haven't told each other yet. And there are stories like Boni, like, last thing I want to say is Hollywood, Los Angeles needs to see us as a community, because we are the second largest community in LA. We're the largest in the state. You know, like, I don't know all the official, but yeah, we're in the 1-2 position all the time. And because of all the mix, because of how we engage, because of our cultural ability to adapt and be resilient, we know what it's like to also be invisible and to be misread. And so my love right now, I'm so inspired to be like, yes, I cannot wait to see the next set of stuff we have to tell each other and the stories that we need to hear. I need to hear a story about a Lola who's going to help me cry and heal. I need to hear a story about my cousin, like, whatever. So that's my rah-rah, like, And for people who are watching, if you haven't seen Apartment Living, this is our chance to come and see a play loved and cared for by these amazing artists and this company, and including Playwrights Arena and Skylight Theater. So thank you for letting me be a cheerleader.
Thank you for that, Alison, always. Yeah, I feel like this is a moment where we could ask for questions from the audience, but I'm not sure if we have access to that right now. So I guess I would like to ask if there's anything else that you wanted to bring up, picking up from, what you've, folks have said. John, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to also acknowledge that, in this moment, in the 2.5 years that we took a pause, I went away for a little bit just to reflect on really, what I have done, what my company has done, and what should we do further to to keep supporting those dreams. And one of the things that I am really working out right now is to find more Filipino designers. I can't find them. I've met with several people, but literally I'm like, are there no Filipino lighting designers in LA? I mean, are there no Filipino sound designers? Are there no? I've met two set designers, but I feel like we need to cultivate these nationwide. There's a lot, but in LA particularly, it's just going, you want to make sure that as we, especially for Panelists Arena and Skylight Theater, we're committed in having 50-50. Every production always has to have at least 50% BIPOC artists on stage and off stage. And so as we're always challenged in the design team, because the people that are really, really good that we've worked with a lot happen to be white, designers. And there's nothing wrong with them, nothing at all. But when we're trying to uplift and really cultivate the next generation of BIPOC designers, where are they? And I feel like I need to really focus and really hunt them down and go to different schools that are like, where are these, where are they coming from and graduating, so that we can start like nurturing them and hopefully not lose them to, regional theaters outside of LA and off to New York, that if they can stay in LA. But the issue always is about money. And so how do we support that? And how do we support artists in general, right? So it's like, how do we keep supporting them so that we are really nurturing these BIPOC artists, especially Filipinx artists in our, the younger folks and also the mid-career ones who happen to have first, second jobs just so that they can act. And wouldn't it be great if we can support and say, here's the money, you don't have to work, we got you, and let's create the work. And it's always been the challenge. And so it's always about, in my head, about how do we do that so that we can keep cultivating them and we keep them in our company, and we keep training them and giving them opportunities, so that Alison's direction and playwriting will reflect that. Boni's writing is out there, so that all of the work that we're doing is actually like, creating that work for people.
Oh, thank you, John. Okay, there I am.
Have
Thank you.
questions?
We do have questions. I'll read them out now. But one thing that I want to just quickly add here that I thought that was interesting, connecting what Alison and John had mentioned about, and really Boni too, about like really Filipinx, not just in terms of both in representation in the story, but also in the body, like in the laboring body, right? Is what you said, John, like thinking about your theater as one that is, I think it's in the mission that it says it's sort of committed to LA artists. But then you talked about sort of these, well, now if there's no one in LA, you can get somebody from here and there. So I'm very curious about how those, Alison, what you said, the place-basedness, right? And our commitment to that. And then this kind of new monograph that I'm writing about is called Asian American Elsewheres, right? So so I'm very curious about, kind of that how we now start to think differently about place-basedness, place-based identities. So I just wanted to interject with that. And, again, just to add to the thoughts that we're bringing up. But I'd like to now go to some of these questions, and I'll read them out, pick up what you like, so that it's, we put it out to our folks. So we have a question from Tyree. What do you think the future looks like for Filipinx representation in theater? And from Bo Wise, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but do you find the depictions of Filipinx characters in media, have they been accurate and they want to know your thoughts on that. Juliana Ojeda asks, how do we get SDLA collab going? All right, so, and let's see, somebody else, Maurice, maybe. Thank you for this. I'm interested in opening my own theater one day. Excellent. What would be some of the first steps to consider, especially during these times? So, and I just wanted to read all that out and then just please respond, panelists, to the ones that you could speak to. Thank you.
Hi, Juliana. Thank you so much for your question. I think it is a really good and powerful conversation to be had. I would love to have a sit down or even a Zoom meeting with you and figure out how that is possible. I think there is a possibility. I mean, we are just 2 hours away from each other, and I think there is a growing, community of Filipino artists and community in San Diego, and I think there is something really powerful as far as like combining our efforts to do something, and maybe there's a collaboration to be had where we present something or in writing or something. And I think there are many ways to do that, and I would love to just seriously have a one-on-one conversation with you, and let's figure out, have some ideas and see where that could go. And I did speak with Leia Ramarillo. She was one of the scenic designers that I talked with. She's amazing, trying to get her in and work with us.
Get it, scenic designer. I'll take that last question, and then Boni, you can choose from some of those other two. But just like, if you're interested in starting your own theater company, I think one of the questions I would ask you to ask yourself and anybody you're going to start it with is why? Why are you starting a separate company? Is their company already doing what you're interested in? Is part of what you're doing, are you starting a company because you feel like that's your only way to produce your work? You know what I mean? There's a lot of questions to think about in terms of, and for a nonprofit theater company, it requires a whole lot of, like I think John was saying earlier, just a whole lot of other things, like how do you run a 501c3? What are the rules of all these things? So to consider the form of the company that you're taking, to consider the function of the company, of what you're trying to do, and then also to consider who are the collaborators you want to build this new place with, this new baby with, and how do your values connect and align, and one question I would ask us right now is what purpose does theater serve in the communities in which it exists? We no longer can just parachute ourselves in. We can no longer just be an Ivy White Tower. For a lot of us, for Filipinos, theater was not that for us. It's in the streets, it's like in the church, it's all over, right? It's in our family spaces. So I would just invite, there's probably an opportunity for us to also reinvigorate what theater is, like what a theater company is. So that's another question I have for that person. Thank you.
I think in terms of, I mean, obviously I haven't seen every little representation of Filipinos in media. The ones that I have seen, I know kind of are, because I know that, just for instance, like if Reggie Lee's character on Grimm, like I know that there were Filipino writers on that were writing specifically towards that one Aswang episode. So I know that when people actually take the time to get specific, they actually usually get it right. But those examples of representation are so few and far between. I'm a big reality TV junkie, and I have to say that reality TV gets it right quicker than made up stories. Survivor just had this Filipino winner, so that was kind of exciting. The chefs that show up on like Top Chef, they're legit. Like, I think through cooking, that's a huge thing. There's been before pandemic, there was a big surge in Filipino representation in terms of food, like people were starting to take notice. And I think those things are just as important to theater because it really adds to the landscape. You know what I mean? You know, anybody who's had lumpia who loves it, all of a sudden, you know what I mean? You say you're Filipino, there's just that instant connection of that one thing. And sometimes that's all you need is those one things more often. So yeah, I think the representation that I do see out there, I don't know, it's just so little. I mean, even Grey's Anatomy, I felt like they got it right. I mean, you know what I mean?
But because
like,
they asked somebody.
yeah,
And I'll
I
just
think
say,
so.
I
Yeah.
will humbly say, I know the real life girly that girly was named after. She's not a nurse, but her name is Girly. And we had a whole moment about, girl, your name got on the TV show. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to say, yes, in that instance, Grey's Anatomy was purposeful
Yes.
about including Pinais, right? So,
Yeah.
and,
But it
and
took 17 seasons. But
it did.
Yes.
It
yes.
did. It did. And I want to acknowledge Tyree's question about what is the future of Filipinx representation in theater. I think it is this. It is inquiry. It is imagination. It is robustness. It is refusing to accept a limited scope of how Filipinos are understood in this country, and that really our stories, we need to be told. We need to tell each other our stories. We also need to be able to tell people in community with us what our stories are. So what are Filipinx stories in context with Latinos, in context with African Americans, in context with Indigenous people, in context with Middle Eastern people, in context with other AAPI folks, in context with white people. So I just appreciate that our future is bright. And the thing I want to say to anybody is our representation gets better because people who are watching this will ask the companies they're visiting, do you have shows about Filipinos? When was the last time you had a Filipinx story? That will also affect and impact our futures as well. So I want to say that. And yay, Ned's Lola in Spider-Man.
And enough plays or musicals about Imelda Marcos.
No more.
Can we just move on? Can we move on? We are deeper and much more, complex than just like the Marcoses and the shoes. So we have a lot of stories to tell. And I think, we have to just give ourselves the time and the space to really make that happen. And this is just a small group of Filipino artists who are doing it, and there are a lot of us out there. And I think engaging us into a conversation to create the work is the step to make it happen. And I love what Alison is talking about, the intersection of stories, of intersection of Vietnam and Philippines, and Japan and the Philippines, and the Muslims and the Muslims in Mindanao. I mean, just really, what are our connections, and how do we, and I know Boni and I are working on something else that intersects, Jewish life and Filipino life. So all of this is really a great way to not only expose us, our culture, but really mixing it up with other cultures that we get, that there are some universality in our lives.
Thank you, John. Anything that you want to add, Boni, in terms of this question around the future of Filipinx theater?
I mean, I totally get what Alison's saying, and I feel like I've always practiced that from day one. My like day one, my work is almost always about the intersection, and it's always been multicultural, because I think Filipinos are so good at adapting that we're kind of like everywhere. So I always, unless it's a specifically like a Filipino family, even my Filipino families tend to be multicultural. So I for me, that's just a given, not a goal. Yeah.
And that's why you're the ate like that. So
Great, thank you so much. That's wonderful, because I think that this is really, it's not a goal, it's not sort of the end point, it is the starting point. And so this conversation and then the textures of all your work really is about what, the richness of being like starting from there, right? So it's a different goal. It's really a different goal. And I appreciate it. I appreciate y'all so much. always just in awe and inspired by everything that you do. I feel really lucky that I'm, you're within my sphere. So just want to thank you again. And please, for folks who haven't made it yet to apartment living, I think we're going to see a little bit of it to close out the panel. And again, thank you, Skylight. Thank you, Playwrights Arena. Thank you, Seth, Tyree, Armando, my friend Armando, and John, Boni, and Alison. Thank you so much for this conversation.
And thank you, Lucy, for moderating for us.
Thank you. All right.
How do I connect to my character? I connect a lot to Dixon, being young, trying to figure out what you want to do, trying to make your space in the world. Those are all feelings that I really connect with and what I see in Dixon,
She's Filipino, works hard, and is a single mom, divorced. All of those things I connect with. The dynamic is very much the same. He thinks I'm annoying sometimes, but we love each other, that kind of thing.
So my mom's a nurse, and Dixon's mother is a nurse as well. So a lot of the conversations and dynamics that Dixon experiences with Easter are more or less almost word by word what I've had with my own mom. I'm definitely a mama's boy.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And thank you again to our lovely panelists, John Lawrence Rivera, Boni B. Alvarez, and Alison de la Cruz, as well as our amazing moderator, Lucy MSP Burns. And if you haven't already, come see Apartment Living now until April 24th at Skylight Theater in Los Angeles. Thank you all again. Be well and have a good night.